Insight into the relationship between China and Africa, we talked to Calestous Juma, a professor with the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School. I started by asking him about the outlook of the partnership.
I think the context is really important in that the first 30 years of post-colonial Africa were devoted to decolonization. The 90s and the beginning of this century, Africa has been focusing almost entirely on economic development. And the limiting factor to Africa's growth has always been infrastructure investments. And that's where China has been able to play a very important role, both historically, but even more in contemporary terms. So I expect that China's role in Africa's infrastructure investments is going to expand rather than diminish.
Let's talk about technology and how it is diversifying the African economies, IT specifically.
This is very much, the technology part is very much linked to infrastructure, because technology is really to a large extent around manufacturing, but you can't do any manufacturing if you are not able to move resources, goods, and services. And that's why China's investment, both in transportation infrastructure, but also in telecoms, has helped to lay the foundation that makes it possible for African countries to start thinking about other types of technology investments beyond telecommunications.
We know that the Chinese cell phone maker Huawei is really big there, but we also know that the Silicon Valley area in the U.S. is investing large in Africa.
These investments are very much driven by a changing interest among Africans to focus more on attracting foreign businesses and shifting towards manufacturing. We see countries like Ethiopia that don't export a lot of raw materials, but their relationship with China has been shaped very much by engagement with the manufacturing activities. This is also true of countries like Rwanda that are not major exporters of raw materials, but are becoming service hubs for trade in the region. And that's what is starting to attract firms worldwide, both from China, India, Brazil, and even more interestingly, Turkey is emerging as one of the largest investors in Africa at the moment, with a pledge to create embassies, to establish embassies in all African countries. So this, I think the profile of foreign engagement in Africa is going to change very much in a ways that would make China not so special.
What about the defense base that was built in Djibouti? How does this demonstrate China's revolving role in Africa?
The base in Djibouti is an interesting one because Djibouti also has an American base. So China is not the first one to establish a base in Djibouti. It's a very important post in terms of movement of goods, marine transportation. Any country that's a significant trading player in the global economy would want to be sure that it has access to the Red Sea, and having a presence in Djibouti is particularly important. The other factor here is that China is becoming increasingly interested and under pressure to participate in peacekeeping activities across the continent. And that means having some presence on the continent that allows it to respond fast to peacekeeping efforts becomes an essential component. China is not the only one that is doing this. Japan has sent a peacekeeping force in South Sudan. It's the first time that Japan has had a fighting force in close to 70 years.
Professor, 1 billion people in Africa. For so long, China has really benefited from the natural resources in Africa. Is that still the case?
The natural resource base has been a stimulus for historical partnerships between China and Africa. But over time, that has shifted considerably. Because if you look at countries where China is actually most active, they are not necessarily raw material exporting countries. And even more significantly, African countries themselves are increasingly becoming interested in industrialization, not so much in the export of raw materials. So the question of infrastructure for regional integration, the creation of markets within Africa becomes a lot more important in these relations between China and Africa.